Hi everyone! I have a tutorial today for making a fun drawstring bag. This is the perfect pattern for a beginning seamstress, especially young seamstresses who are just learning to sew and need a pattern that doesn't require buttons or zippers. I'm going to be using a pattern called the Line Drawstring Bag pattern, and this is by Jenny Baker. And it comes with the directions for making 8 different sizes of bags and even a formula if you want to make a custom size bag. So let's get started. First, you're going to need a sewing machine. Then you're going to need your pattern, the Line Drawstring Bag by Jenny Baker. You're going to need 3 pieces of coordinating fabric. You can use 1/4 of a yard each or 3 fat quarters, scissors or a rotary cutter and mat, pins or clips. Once you've selected your fabric, you want to cut 2 pieces for the interior of the bag that measure 7.5 inches wide by 10 inches tall. You want to cut 2 pieces of fabric for the exterior trim where the drawstring casing will go, and those are 7.5 inches wide by 3.5 inches tall. And again, you want 2 of those. You want to cut 2 pieces for the exterior main part of your bag that measure 7.5 inches wide by 7 inches tall. And you want to lay your pieces out in this order. This is the order that we are going to stitch them together. So we're going to have interior, exterior trim, exterior main, exterior main, exterior trim, and interior fabric. The next step is to start sewing your pieces together. You're going to use a 1/4 inch seam. If you're a beginner, you can use masking tape or painter's tape to mark a 1/4 inch seam guide. If you don't have masking or painter's tape, for this project you can use the edge of your presser foot. That typically gets you close to 1/4 of an inch on most machines. And for this craft, consistency is what's important. So you want to get as close as you can to 1/4 of an inch and use that seam allowance throughout the project. So we want to take our interior fabric and our first exterior trim, and we want to place those right sides together. And we're going to take these 2 pieces to the machine, and we're going to stitch along the 7.5 inch edge and 1/4 of an inch. Now I'm going to use Wonder Clips today to clip my pieces together to hold them and to keep them lined up, or you can use some pins. So let's go to the machine and start sewing. I'm at the sewing machine and I'm ready to start sewing my drawstring bag. Make sure that you have placed your fabrics right side together. You want to make sure that your 7.5 inch edge of fabrics are even, and you can clip or pin those together. And remember, when you're sewing your seam allowances, to reverse at the beginning and the end of your seam allowances. Usually 2 to 3 stitches is sufficient, and this is going to make sure that your seam allowance doesn't pull apart. I'm going to stop and take out the clip and continue sewing down this seam allowance. And you're going to continue sewing these pieces together in the correct order until they're all stitched together, and then we'll come back for the next step. Once your pieces are all sewn together, you're going to end up with one long strip of fabric. You want to go ahead and press all of your seams open, and pressing is an important part of sewing. It helps our fabric to lay flat, and it helps our pieces to go together. So you're going to press each of your seam allowances open, and then we'll come back and do the next sewing step. Once you have your pieces ironed, you want to fold your bag in half, right sides together, and go ahead and pin or clip those 3 raw edges together to keep them lined up. And we're going to make a couple of marks on our bag. The first marks are going to be for the opening for our drawstring casings. And because this is a 3 inch piece of fabric, I want a 1 inch opening in the middle of this piece of fabric. So I've just measured over 1 inch from each seam allowance and put a mark on both sides, and that's going to give me a 1 inch opening right in the middle of that piece. The second marks that you're going to make are going to be at the end where the raw edges are of the interior pieces. And this opening is to turn the bag right side out. I've marked a 2.5 inch opening. Once we get those marked, we're going to start sewing these layers of the bag together. You want to start at the seam allowance for the exterior pieces of the fabric, and we're going to sew down to the first mark for the casings, and we want to back stitch, stop stitching, come to the next mark, back stitch, and we want to stitch all the way down this interior piece. When you get to the corner, you want to leave your needle down in the fabric so that you can pivot your fabric and get a nice 90-degree angle turn without any loose stitches. Then you're going to stitch to the opening. Remember to reverse. Cut your threads, come to the next opening, reverse, pivot at your corner with your needle down, continue sewing down to your next casing mark. You want to reverse and cut your threads, come to the next casing mark, reverse, and stitch all the way down to the seam allowance for the exterior part of the bag. Once you have everything sewn, it's time to mark the bottom of your bag to make a gusset or to make a flat bottom for the bag. So we're going to come down to the interior corners, and what you want to do is you want to meet the bottom seam allowance with the side seam allowance. So you can feel through your fabrics and get those lined up. Once you have those lined up, we want the gusset to have a depth or a width of 2.5 inches. So I took a small ruler and I placed it across the bottom of the bag until I found a width of 2.5 inches, and I do a straight line across. I'm going to go to the machine and I'm going to sew right across this line, and I'm going to repeat that for the second corner of the bottom of the bag. And remember, this is the bottom of your bag. It's going to get a lot of use, so make sure that you do your reverse or back stitching to secure that seam allowance. Once you have those seams stitched, you want to trim off the extra fabric from the corner on both sides. Now, it's a good idea if it's your first time doing this that you turn your bag, go ahead and turn your bag right side out and just double check and make sure that you've stitched correctly. And it's also a good time to go around your bag and just to trim off any loose threads that you have, because our next step is going to be to turn the bag right side out and to sew the 2 lines of stitching for our casing where we will put our ribbon or drawstrings. Before you turn your bag right side out, make sure that you have made a gusset for all 4 corners, or that you've boxed all 4 corners. And again, you want to line up the bottom seam of the bag with the side seam, and you want to find the point where you can draw a 2.5 inch line across this corner, okay? And then you want to stitch across that and then trim off the excess. All 4 corners are boxed, and I have this opening at the bottom where I turn the bag right side out. I'm going to take this to the machine, and I am just going to stitch across this opening to close up that open seam allowance. The bag's turned right side out, and I have pushed the interior fabric down inside the bag, and I pressed around the top edge of the bag to have a nice even fold. Now the next step is going to be to find the openings that we left in the bag for our ribbon or drawstring. And what you're going to want to do is to draw 2 parallel lines all the way around the bag, and we want those lines to line up with these 1-inch openings. And the lines that we draw, we are going to stitch along to actually make a casing to hold the ribbon. So when I come back, I'll have the lines drawn and we'll start stitching. Okay, I have the 2 lines of stitching that are lined up with the casing, and they're about 1 inch apart. And the next step is to put the elastic through the openings. So I'm just using a a couple of pieces of ribbon. They're each 20 inches long for this size bag. And I'm going to use a safety pin to run the ribbon through both sides of the casing. So for the first piece of ribbon, I'm going to insert it in the casing, and I'm going to run it all the way around the bag and bring it out the same side that I started in. So I don't want to come out that opening. I want to pass right on by. And I'll take the pin off and tie a small knot in the end of each ribbon, just to kind of help with some of the fraying. Okay, and next I'm going to start on the opposite side, and I'm going to run this ribbon all the way around the bag in the opposite direction. And that's going to give me drawstrings on each side to pull and cinch the bag. Both of the drawstrings are in the bag, so I'm going to pull the drawstrings and cinch the bag. And as you can see, that makes a really cute snack size bag. If you like this video, hit the like and subscribe.